Welcome everyone to Learn at Lunchtime. I'm museum educator Sherry Trimble. So glad you could join us today as we kick off our charter celebrations. With me today is retired archivist Linda Ries, who during her tenure at the Pennsylvania State Archives was she was the caretaker of the Penn Charter of 1681. And she's always been a resource to all those in the archives, and me, myself, as an educator. We've spent many times talking about the charter. In her retirement, she is now the editor of the Pennsylvania History, a journal of Mid-Atlantic Studies. So Linda, would you like to start your PowerPoint?
Thank you very much, Sherry. Okay, well, hello and welcome. I'm honored to be asked to come back and talk a bit about my favorite document. This is document number 1, as far as we are concerned at the State Archives, and we like to call it Pennsylvania's birth certificate. This is the charter given to William Penn from King Charles II of England for the land which became the colony and then the state of Pennsylvania. And this is page 1. The charter normally lives here in the Archives Tower at 3rd and Forster Streets in Harrisburg, but I understand it's moving. The Archives is building a new building on 6th Street in Harrisburg, which is about a mile or so away. So it will have a whole new home. Okay, let's talk about the catalyst for the charter, William Penn. 1644 to 1718. William Penn was a Quaker. He was born during the religious, shall we say, religious wars in England. And he grew up in the Cromwellian period. He started out as an Anglican, but he became a Quaker. We think of him, the stereotype of William Penn is that nice guy on the Quaker Oats box, which actually that's not him on the Quaker Oats box. It's just a generic Quaker, but people tend to think that's William Penn, and it isn't. But anyway, he was a radical for his time. The Quakers were considered radicals, a radical Protestant group, whereas most of England was Anglican. They were persecuted for their beliefs, and they were fined and thrown in prison. Mainstream England, as I said, they were mostly Anglicans, kind of thought they were crazy. They would dress very plainly. They talked in the language of the Bible, which is thee and thou, and they endeavored to live simply as Jesus did. They were fined for, they were not permitted to congregate on any street corner and do preaching. And for this and other matters, they were fined and thrown into prison. When they were at their meeting houses, in prayer, when they felt the Spirit of the Lord within them, they would quake. And that's how they get the name Quakers. Their real name is the Religious Society of Friends of Jesus. But the English called them Quakers. It's actually a derogatory term, but it's stuck with them even today. William Penn converted to Quakerism in the 1660s, and he did a lot of writing about Quaker religious thought. He was renowned in Britain, and he would travel to Europe and preach his philosophy. And he was a great advocate for religious toleration, which is the accepting of all religious groups, no matter what they believed in. He was the son of William Penn Sr. He was an admiral, who was an admiral in the British Navy. Penn's father won a few wars, sea wars against the Dutch in the 1660s on behalf of the crown. He was a great friend of King Charles II, he would actually clothe and feed the Navy himself, because the crown was cash poor, and it's called, he did this for victualling of the Navy. So at the end of the wars, the crown, Charles II, owed William Penn's father about 16,000 pounds for the victualling of the Navy. At first, when William Penn converted to Quakerism, William Penn's father disowned him. It would be the equivalent of one of our children joining a cult and going to Idaho or something like that. But they reconciled on his father's deathbed, and William Penn became very wealthy in 1670 at the death of his father. So William Penn did have some money, but what he did was he wanted to use this to further the Quaker philosophy. He dreamed of a place where people of many different religions, including Quakers, could worship without government intervention. And he approached Charles II in May 1680 with a plan. He asked the king, "I will forgive you the 16,000 pounds that you owe my family if you gave me land in the New World." So Charles readily agreed to this because he was known as the Merry Monarch. He spent his money freely. As I said, the crown was cash poor, and Charles needed to spend money on his courtesans and his opulent lifestyle. And Charles had plenty of land in the New World. And this was also a good excuse to get rid of those crazy Quakers, send them all over there, send them to the New World. So he agreed to this. And the document we are going to discuss is a charter for land. It is actually a feudal relationship between the crown and the subjects. Land was usually given by the monarchy to thank a citizen of England for their service to the crown. So the document was finalized and finished and presented to William Penn on March 4th, 1681. So at this point, William Penn became the world's largest private landowner at age 37. Not too shabby. So let's talk about the document itself. It's actually on 4 pages. And when it was presented to William Penn, all 4 pages would have been piled on top of each other, 1, 2, 3, 4, and folded. You see the fold lines on the different pages here. And the Great Seal of England would have been woven through it and then presented to William Penn that way as a packet. You can see there are what they call planar distortions. The charter is parchment, so it's warping. And everyone asks what happened on page 1. The story goes that the Penn family stored records at a warehouse in London in the 18th century, and water dripped in through the roof, and page 1 was on the outside, and it actually rotted a hole in the leather of the parchment. And we often tell, you can see it's actually not too bad for being 341 years old. And as we tell people, you'd be pretty fragile too if you were 341. The charter is similar in design and layout as other charters that Charles issued during his reign. This is the charter for the Carolinas in 1663, and it's similar in style to our charter. That is, it has these borders, and it has Charles inside a big letter C with the first line engrossed writing, very large writing. The same thing, this is the charter for the Hudson Bay Company, same design. And what they would do is to create this, It's on parchment. Parchment is the hide of an animal. It's probably calfskin or sheepskin, might even be pigskin. They would shave off the hair, bleach the hide in the sun, add chemicals to it to create a white writing surface, and then cut it into the appropriate shapes they needed. In our case, the charter is about 23 by 25 each page, 23 by 25 inches. They used iron gall ink to write the charter with a feather pen. Now, what is iron gall ink? They would take oak wasp galls. Oak wasp galls are growths that grow on an oak leaf when an oak wasp lays its eggs on oak leaves, and this gall is created around the egg to protect it. They would collect these galls, they were crushed, they would create this mucilaginous viscous substance and mixed with iron filings or lamp black, and that would create an ink. Everyone made their own ink back then until ink became commercialized in the 19th century. So there's different variations of this recipe. Now, the problem with iron gall ink is there's iron in it, and iron rusts. And you can see that this is a early land document for land in Pennsylvania. And you can see where the iron has deteriorated, has rusted out. And so that's a problem with a lot of paper documents that are made with iron gall ink. The charter does not seem to suffer from that. Apparently, iron gall ink does better on parchment. So let's look at the different parts of the charter. Again, I'm going to talk about these designs that were made with something called intaglio block printing. The artist would carve a wooden block, ink it, and stamp it. And so these are stamped designs, except for this, all around the borders. And then this area, after that, they would write in this area, whatever the new colony, the wording for the new colony, they would be working from a final draft. So page 1 has Charles's signature. Everybody likes page 1 because it has his portrait. And here he is again, he's inside a giant letter C. And Charles was actually half French. His mother was the daughter of one of the Henrys of France, King Henry, I believe Henry IV. So, and he actually went in exile to France when his father, Charles I, was beheaded, and that led to the Cromwellian period. And when Charles came back to England in 1660, they welcomed him with open arms. He's wearing a wig. Wigs were very fashionable amongst the monarchy and other people in Europe. The reason why they wore wigs, number one, Louis XIV wore a wig, so everybody had to do what the Sun King did, but also it was because of head lice. Head lice was very prevalent, and so they would shave their heads and put these wigs on, and they became quite a fashion statement. Okay, on one of the borders of the charter, this is the fleur-de-lis of France. There are several emblems inside these circles with a crown above them. Now you're asking yourself, why is the fleur-de-lis of France on our charter? Well, the England and France still debated land around Calais, which is the northeast coast of France. And at the time, this had not been resolved. So Charles was claiming that he was also not only King of England, but of Scotland, Ireland, and France. Another symbol, this is the harp of Ireland. And you can see there's the crown again. And you can see periodically there's these interesting little beastie faces periodically on the charter. The 3 lions of Richard the Lion-Hearted. and the Tudor rose. Now, the Tudor rose is actually a white rose inside a red rose, and it comes from the Tudor family. Henry VII, Henry Tudor, united the houses of Lancaster and the House of York. That's what they represent. In 1485, when he won in battle on Bosworth Field, he defeated Richard III. So this has become the symbol of the House of Lancaster and the House of York. And we all know that Lancaster, Pennsylvania is the red rose city, and York is the white rose city, and it comes from that. Elsewhere on page 1, at the bottom of page 1, center bottom and about 9 lines up from the bottom, is the very first appearance of the word Pennsylvania. We do so call it Pennsylvania. Pensilvania, spelling was not standardized then. And we may know the story that Pennsylvania is not named after William Penn. It's named after his father because the king wanted to honor William Penn's father. William Penn just wanted to call it Sylvania or New Wales. Being a Quaker, he did not want to show vanity, but the king insisted you name it Pennsylvania after your father. Okay, at the bottom of page 4, I know this is kind of fuzzy, but it says by writ of privy seal, which means that it has passed His Majesty's Privy Council. The Privy Council is kind of like the executive cabinet or so with the presidency, or these were his right-hand men. So it passed the privy seal of the king. And down here you see the word Pigot. This is for Sir Richard Pigot, who was the clerk of His Majesty's patents. So the charter was approved by King Charles on February 28th, 1681, and it took them 4 days to calligraphy this document, the 4 pages. And on March the 4th, the Great Seal of England was placed upon the charter. And that's what makes it a legal document, that date. That's why we have March the 4th as the beginnings of Pennsylvania's birthday. I want to add that at one time, we did have the Great Seal of England placed upon the charter, and this rust mark is the remains of the skippet, which was the metal box that would have held the Great Seal of Charles II. Again, it's at the bottom of page 4, and you see these little holes here at the very bottom. That's where the silk braid that would have been attached to the skippet, that's where it would have had been attached to the charter. So we did have the Great Seal at one time. It has disappeared over the years. We do not know what happened to it. However, we found out about 20 years ago that the British Public Record Office maintains all of the Great Seals for its monarchs, and they made us a new one for our charter. And this would have been a beeswax seal of Charles. This is on the front side. He's sitting on his throne, and there's his long hair. He is defaced, which is what England did when a monarch died or left. So people would not use it illegally. And he's sitting on his throne, and beside him is the lion and the unicorn of France, or of England. Okay, this is the other side of the seal, where Charles is on a horse with a sword, and his hair is flowing behind him, and I think he's leaping over the Thames River. I'm not sure about that. But this would have been attached at one time to the charter. Okay, what does it say? All right, there is a preamble, a long paragraph, where they talk about how we want to reward the Penn family and they cite that William Penn Sr. in the battles against the Dutch in the 1660s did the crown great service. Also, one of the interesting things in the preamble says they want to reduce the savage nations. The Indians, of course, were not consulted at all. England and the Spanish and the French just came over and took over. Now, William Penn ameliorated that somewhat, and subsequently, when he did take the land, he made treaties for the various purchases with the Native Americans. The rest of the charter, it defines the geographical parameters of the new colony, which at that time was the area north of Maryland, west of New Jersey and Delaware, and south of New York. The southern boundary was not settled because the Lord Baltimore and Maryland contested the southern boundary with the Penn family, and it was not resolved until 1760 with the signing of the Penn-Baltimore Agreement, which caused the line of the Mason-Dixon line to be drawn. Okay, the document also defines Penn's authority. He could set up his colony as he saw fit because it was a private land transaction. And to his credit, he could have simply made himself king, but he did not. He wanted a colony where, again, people could worship in toleration and not be bothered by the government, no government intervention. In 1997, actually in 1984, the charter had been on display at the State Museum, the original charter, since the 1960s when the State Museum was built. And we were very concerned about it because it was warping. Parchment tends to warp. It tends, as a friend of mine says, tends to go back into the shape of the animal it once was. The exhibit lights were beating down on it all day. So we decided to take it to the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts in Philadelphia to get it conserved. And Dr. Brent Glass, our executive director at the time, asked for a state police escort because this is, again, document number one, extremely important document. And I was part of that escort. I rode shotgun, and these are our wonderful police officers taking a good look at the charter as it arrived in Philadelphia. So it was conserved. This is in 1997. And then in 2007, we took it back down to the Conservation Center, and they placed each page in what they call a marble seal case. It is hermetically sealed, and it has its own little environment there, temperature and humidity wise. And it is maintained in a special vault in the Archives Tower. And I understand they are constructing a similar vault at the new building. Okay, as Pennsylvanians, we can be very, very proud of William Penn and his efforts. Again, he was a leader. Pennsylvania was one of the first conscious attempts at democracy in the New World. Penn's Great Law of 1682 established religious toleration in the new colony and the separation of church and state. And later, these principles were written into the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And many states, when they adopted their new constitution, incorporated these principles into their constitutions as well. So William Penn wrote to a friend a few days after receiving his charter, "It is a clear and just thing, and my God that had given it me through many difficulties will, I believe, bless it and make it the seat of a nation." And Pennsylvania did indeed become the seat of a nation. As again, I said, in Philadelphia, The Declaration was signed here. The Constitution was signed here. The greatest battle, the defining battle of the Civil War was here. And Pennsylvanians have gone on to settle the rest of the nation. So at this point, here is some links to different things that you can look up about the charter. That gives you far more information than I have able to give in my 20 minutes. So therefore, I'm finished. And let's take some questions and answers.
A little bit more about being a Quaker, being a religion. So, he grew up Anglican, which was the Church of England, and that's the law, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, back then, if the king were Catholic, you had to be Catholic. If the king were Protestant, you had to be Protestant. And I'm sure you know that when Henry VIII wanted to divorce Anne Boleyn, that it was a Catholic country, but the Pope would not grant him the annulment. So Henry said, "To heck with you, I'm going to become the defender of faith of England." And that's how we get the Anglican Church. It is really the Catholic Church as presented in England.
And so William choosing to become part of the Quaker faith, he actually spent time in jail a couple
Yes,
times.
he did. He spent, let me see, the early part of his life, he and some other Quakers were thrown into jail for publicly speaking. And he was also arrested and spent some time in the early 1700s because he was not good at managing his money. He left it up to supposed friends who mismanaged his money. And he was actually embezzled by Philip Ford, who was supposedly managing his colony for him. He spent almost 8 or 9 months in prison, in debtor's prison.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, for his religious beliefs, he did spend some time in jail.
Yeah. Radical.
Yeah, he was a radical.
Yeah. So storing the documents, the Penn family and his heirs, was this a common thing to store your items? Was it just an afterthought? Was it a law office? What kind of storage?
Okay. The charter was Penn's own copy. Like I said, it was, there was actually a couple different versions that the Crown would have kept and so forth. But the family, after William Penn's death, the story goes, they stored his papers in a warehouse in London. Mm-hmm. And that's when this leak happened. And then the charter itself came to America in the early 1800s because there was a lawyer for the Penn family arguing a case for them for lands in Delaware. And so he, to help in his legal machinations, he brought the charter and a number of other documents to America. And in 1812, I'm assuming with the permission of the family, he gave the charter to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and that's how we own it.
Mm-hmm. All right, so a little bit more about the document itself. And does it discuss how he could go about selling the land? Because obviously he was able to do that.
Pennsylvania, in addition to being an area for religious toleration and welcoming different people of different religions, it was also a money-making scheme, land speculation scheme for William Penn. And that was that he intended to grow wealthy that way. But again, as I said, he was not necessarily good at managing his money. And he was always cash poor. But one of the first things he began doing was selling the land. And there is a document that the State Archives has called the List of First Purchasers, which is about 240 people, a list of 240 people. They're all Quakers, either Welsh, Irish, or Scottish Quakers. And they are listed as to which land, what their profession was, and how many acres in the New World they received. So yes, he made some of his money that way, and that's how he sold the land. Another technique that the Penn family used is they would create something called manors, and they would deliberately hold land back from sale until the land prices around it rose.
Hmm.
Because there would be settlement there, the land would become more valuable. And so then they would start to sell the land in these manors, of which there's Conestoga Manor, there is Springettsbury Manor in York County. There is the Manor of Lowther here on the West Shore where I live, the West Shore of the Susquehanna. So, and that they have all their own separate stories.
Yeah. And I also, in the first purchasers, one of my favorite things is that there's actually some women on there.
Yes,
I
yes,
think that's awesome.
yes. Well, that's another radical thing that
I know.
the Quakers did. They permitted women to worship alongside the men. Women were considered equal to men in the eyes of God. So they were permitted to preach, and some of the Welsh Quakers, well, actually not just the Welsh, but they did have some means. And if you look at this document, it gives their profession, and most of them were like merchants or brewers, but they did have some means. But yeah, there were a number of women.
Yeah, I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a little bit more about, we talk about the outside edge. They were more interested in learning a little bit more on there. So those were the blocks, right? They used the block printing on that. And not every page is the same. So when you go to look, there is some slight variations on.
Yes, there is. And I did not mention on, I think it's page 2, the thistle of Scotland is in one of those cartouches, because Scotland was one of the lands that England claimed. So yeah, like I said, there are all sorts of interesting beasties on the designs. There is one place where there is a Talbot hound, which is an extinct dog, is attacking a rabbit. And I have never known what the significance of that is. And I will find out someday, because it bothers me. But yes, it's all sorts of wonderful designs.
So of course, Pennsylvania in the name. So there was a question that came up here, and I'm gonna read this so you get the whole thing. So in circa 1883, History of Huntington and Blair Counties, J. Simpson Africa asserts that Pennsylvania is not named for the Penns, but the Penn, or Penn, was a Dutch or German word for hill. It's also named Wooded Hill. So tell us a little bit about how they came up with Pennsylvania.
Okay. There are variations on that, but no, it was definitely named after William Penn Sr. But Penn in Welsh, I don't think it's Dutch or French, means a small mountain. So there's a play on that, but no, I hate to say J. Simpson Africa is incorrect, but he's incorrect. And the Indians called him Brother Onus, because Onus means feather in, I believe it's the Delaware language, because he wrote with a feather. So they called William Penn Brother Onus.
So in comparison, our charter, would you compare ours in terms of condition shape? Ours better, same, worse?
Ours is a little worse for wear. If you look at the Hudson Bay Company charter and the charter for the Carolinas, they're a little bit better than our charters. However, I remember hearing a number of years ago that they gave South Carolina gave its charter, maybe it's North Carolina, to a conservator to care of, and the conservator put some kind of oil, because the theory is leather, you should oil leather, and it ruined it. It darkened it. And as the North Carolina Archivist told me, it looked like an old ball glove.
But no, I think ours, yeah, it's a survivor, but it's been through a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to combine kind of two questions here. So one of the questions, 16,000 pounds. All right, so how do we convert it? And I've recently done the conversion. So it's around 4.27 million. You know, inflation today is pretty high, but around a little over $4 million. And if you think about that, purchasing Pennsylvania for what seems like a small amount,
Mhm.
you know, this money owed to the admiral, how powerful was it? Was this him capturing some? One of the questions was it because he captured land in Jamaica and New Amsterdam? Like,
My understanding is there were two battles he fought in the mid 1660s against Heer van Opdam, who is mentioned on page 1 of the charter, and they were naval battles. Although Admiral Penn might have been in Jamaica, I'm not sure.
yeah. I always found it interesting because one of the things that I find most interesting of this is the admiral is that he worked under Charles I, under
Mhm.
Cromwell,
Yes.
and Charles II. Wow.
He was always able to maintain his loyalty to whoever was in power at the time.
That's an interesting
Yeah.
statement because a lot of people couldn't pull that off.
Yeah, he did. He was very, very loyal to England. Maybe not necessarily. I mean, he was loyal to whoever was in power at the
Mhm.
time.
Yeah. So let's see. How long did it take for England to start passing laws that the colonists didn't like that
Yeah.
started this rebellion?
Well, there was this little matter of the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, and it's often called the Great War for Empire, mainly between England and France on the North American continent. England spent a lot of time and money sending soldiers over during the French and Indian War to vanquish the French, especially in Western Pennsylvania. The French still kind of stayed in New France, but they wanted to keep these colonies, and they did two things. After in 1763, at the end of the French and Indian War, one was they created the Proclamation Line of 1763, which was over the mid-Appalachian mountains, went through Pennsylvania and on down into the south, the Shenandoah Valley, and on into North and South Carolina. And settlers were not permitted beyond that point.
Mhm.
Everybody ignored that. They just, they felt that the land was theirs. The second thing that England did was to begin to tax the colonies to help pay for this expensive war that they had just fought. And the colonies took umbrage at that. The first major battle, if you will, about taxation was something called the Stamp Act in 1765, where England would tax a lot of goods coming from America and coming to America. And then they began a series of many other taxes. And again, the colonists took umbrage with that. They felt that they'd had no representation in Parliament, but yet they were being taxed.
Mhm.
So this one thing led to another, and here we have our revolution.
Yeah. Well, Penn only spent 4 years here.
Yes.
And of course, he built Pennsbury Manor, which is,
Mhm.
a replica, is currently one of our PHMC sites. What are your thoughts on him not really spending much time here?
Okay. He was here twice between 1682 and 1684, and later between 1699 and 1701. There were always factions in the British government trying to take his colony away from him. They also did it with Maryland, because England had these many colonies. They were trying to make, shall we say, the bureaucracy simpler, and it would be easier just to bring Penn and Maryland back into the fold as royal colonies. And Penn had to spend an awful lot of time in England at court defending his colony, and he managed it. He managed to do so, and we were indeed a private colony up until the Revolution. So there was always a battle, though, pretty much the whole time since Penn received his colony up until 1776, of the crown continuously trying to take away his charter. So that's pretty much why he spent a lot of time there. He also had a very debilitating stroke in 1712, which he never really recovered from. In fact, there are a couple of documents in the archives that he signed, and you can tell his handwriting is not very good. So it's my understanding he intended to come back to Pennsbury and spend maybe the rest of his life there, but he was never able to.
Well, going with his wives, so when he first received the charter, he was married to Gulielma, right?
Yeah, Gulielma, I think that's how you pronounce her name. I've never been able to pronounce it right. She died. I can't remember her death date, but thereafter, William Penn married Hannah Penn, Hannah Callowhill, from a prominent Quaker family, and she is often she took care of William Penn after his stroke, and he really couldn't run the colony, and she pretty much took over the colony for him and helped to run it with the help of the Penn family lawyers. And upon his death, she became the de facto proprietor of the colony. She died in 1723. Now, William Penn, just to segue here a little bit, William Penn's line has died out. He had something like 16 children, half of whom survived to adulthood. And some of his sons did have families, but his male line has died out. I think that he had a brother, George, I believe his name was George, who people can trace their relationship to William Penn through that line.
All right, Pigott, who was
Yes.
he?
Okay, Sir Richard Pigott, he was the clerk of His Majesty's patents. This, in a sense, this land transaction is a patent, and Richard Pigott was the clerk who took care of these, who prepared the documents for their final ornament. This is an ornamental version of the charter, but he was the clerk of the patents, His Majesty's patents.
Well, I'm going to let you know there's lots of questions here. Do you have any theories on the seal, where it went?
Yes, I do. This is speculation on my part, but
Not truth.
pretty sure it was with the charter when the charter got leaked on in the warehouse in London. It came to America, and then this lawyer for the Penn family gave it to the Commonwealth. Okay, it was on display at the what's called the Old State Museum now, but it was the building in the Capitol building. It's just to the right of the Capitol building, and the legislature asked if it could be framed and hung up. I think they framed all 4 pages. I think that's when we lost the seal. We don't know what happened to it.
Bummer.
Yeah.
Cool that we were able to replicate it.
If anybody can find it, I'd like to know.
I know. So in terms of dividing and giving the land to Penn and the charter, he was given as a proprietor. Was he required to set aside any of that land for the British government?
No.
Yeah.
Nope, it was all his.
No. Interesting on that one.
Now, I think I mentioned he was required, it's in the charter to give the crown something like 10 beaver skins a year and 10 deer
My favorite
skins,
story.
but also something like a fifth of all the gold and silver found in Pennsylvania.
Good
Well,
luck
we
on
know
that.
how that went because there's no gold and silver in Pennsylvania, but I don't know if the beaver skins and the animal skins were ever given to the crown.
I know. I always wondered,
Yeah.
I always thought it'd be fun if we had like a ceremony with,
Yeah, that'd be cool.
All right. There's just a lot of questions here. All right. So this is always a touchy topic, but treatment of the Indians. Penn and his thoughts on treating the Native Americans. We'll stop there. Just his thoughts. We won't go past Penn.
Okay, well, as Quaker, he believed in the equality of humans everywhere, no matter who they were or what they were, and he wanted to treat them fairly. And again, the State Archives houses several treaties between him and the Native Americans. And they started something called the Friendship Chain, which was the series of treaties. Now, after William Penn's death, his sons, who were not Quakers, they were Anglicans, they did not have the same, shall we say, the moral tenacity that William Penn did. And they pretty much built the Indians out of there's the famous walking purchase of 1737, which was a scheme where it was supposed to be as much land as a person could walk in a day. And the Penn family, Thomas Penn, hired runners, and the Delaware got built out of like twice as much land as they originally thought they were giving up. So, and this is again to William Penn's credit, because again, in Virginia, New York, the other colonies, they simply went in and took the land. They maybe fought the Indians for it, but there were no treaties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he really tried to make an attempt at it.
Yes.
And in the end, we bought, I'm using air quotes, bought every piece of land in Pennsylvania, even all the way up into the Erie
Yes.
section.
Yes, we did. William Penn won all of his land claims.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there was this battle with Lord Baltimore about the southern boundary. Virginia claimed the western portion of the colony, and the northern part, what's called the Erie Triangle, that wasn't settled until the 1790s. But all of these claims are marked out in the charter, with the exception of the western part. The charter delineates 5 degrees of longitude west of Philadelphia, and nobody knew then knew where that was exactly. But if you look at the western border between Ohio and West Virginia, today it is indeed 5 degrees of longitude west of Philadelphia. So Pennsylvania is pretty much shaped the way it was originally intended to be.
Have you ever heard of Quakers starting the Fire of London? Great Fire?
No.
I've never heard that. When someone asks,
no, that's a new one on me. I'd like to know more about that.
Funny thing is the admiral's neighbor was Samuel Pepys,
right?
Who, and it's funny if you look at the land boundaries, like literally the fire runs right by their neighborhood.
Yes,
Looked at there's some cool
interesting.
maps out there on that.
Well, I understand Admiral Penn sent William Penn away during the Great Fire and the Great Plague, which was, I believe, the following year. Maybe it was, maybe I have them switched. 1665 and 1666. They sent him to live on their lands in Ireland. So our William Penn missed out on those 2 disasters. But no,
that was
I don't
interesting. I didn't either. I was like, yeah. Usually it's some cow kicking over some lamp or something like that.
Yeah, no,
it was just a really dry summer. Yes. Houses packed close together.
Yeah.
About these women landowners. So we sold the land to these women and the first purchasers. Do you happen to know, like, were they able to keep it? Because most women weren't able to own land in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Well, let me back up a little and say the list of first purchasers are people who bought into William Penn's idea of Pennsylvania. Some of them bought the land just as an investment because they would turn around and resell the land. So, and women did this as well.
And some never even came here. They just
Yeah,
bought it.
right.
Yeah. With those, so you know a William Allen as one of the first purchasers?
Oh boy. Yes, I think so. I'm not sure he's the William Allen that Allen Township is named after here in Cumberland County. But yes, I'm pretty sure I'd have to go look. We have a reproduction of the list of first purchasers, but that name does strike me as familiar.
Yeah. So a couple of questions are, are these online? Yes. So the first purchasers is online. It's part of that doc heritage that you included. So, and as well as the charter. And not only do you see an image, but there are transcripts as well, right?
Well, I'm sure there is one for the charter. It's been a while, so I don't know about the list of first purchasers. But I would say even, there are a lot of people interested in the genealogy of the first purchaser. So I think if you would even just Google it up, you could find a transcript of it.
So we're getting to the end, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about the conservation of the charter. So what kind of steps did they take in conserving that?
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, the charter is the hide of an animal, probably calfskin or sheepskin. There's a skin side and a fur side, and you can tell actually if you feel a piece of parchment, and it has to be kept flat because again it wants to warp back into the shape of the animal it once was. It's very, very susceptible to changes in temperature and humidity will really accelerate the warping. So the charter, again, it has planar distortions, these distortions caused by the warping. One thing that the Conservation Center in Philadelphia did was they put it on a mat, acid-free cardboard mats, and they would put Egyptian cotton strings from the end of the mat board to the charter, and they would attach it that way, and that would keep it flat. It's not unlike a trampoline. So that would keep it free from these planar distortions. That's one thing they did. They cleaned it very gently with crumbled erasers, and off the top of my head, I'm not sure what else they did, but again, they put it in what's called this Marvel seal case, which actually has, I think it's an aluminum backing, but it's a hermetically sealed case for each page, and that is temperature and humidity controlled. And then each page was put into a small exhibit case. And the way this happened previously is during the year, the charter would be stored in a special vault in the archives tower at 50 degrees, 35% humidity, a high security vault. And then we would get it out once a year on its birthday to celebrate Charter Day. But again, it's very fragile. As I say, it'd be fragile too if you were 341.
Yeah, and leaning towards that, a couple of people are asking about seeing it right now. It's not currently out and not out for this year's Charter Day, and we're going to be moving it to the new archives when that's ready pretty soon. And so moving it back and forth is not going to be.
I don't know, because that's the decision that I'm not
beyond
making.
us, right? So, the copy is always here at the State Museum, which I was very happy a couple of years ago. They updated, and we have a much better replica that's currently on display. So you can see it. You can definitely, it looks exactly like the original charter, but future plans probably going to be seeing it
Yeah.
over at the new archives because they're going to want to celebrate it too.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, this is an important one because this question, the king said nothing about religious toleration. So at what point did William Penn put that pen to paper about religious toleration?
Well, he had been an advocate for many, many years. He wrote several small books, like some Fruits of Solitude, that's the name of it. But in terms of setting up his colony, the government of his colony, the very first indication of religious toleration is the document that I mentioned as it's called the Great Law. And it's the first set of laws that William Penn presented to the brand new legislative body, the first body of the colonial legislature. And the very first provision of that great law is that there will be no government intervention in religious beliefs. And it goes on to outline how the colony should be set up. And but it's very important provision which established religious toleration. And I think Pennsylvania was fairly unique in that respect. I mean, there was that fellow Roger Williams up there in New England. I'm not sure how much of his philosophy went into the government, but a lot of William Penn's philosophy went into the establishment of his colony.
Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Linda, for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.